I am 82 years old, and I want to share the story of my greatest regret, moving into a nursing home. Back then, a few years ago, it seemed like the right decision. My family was worried about me. The falls, the blood pressure, the advancing age, all of it frightened them much more than it did me. They assured me that the nursing home would be cozy, calm, and safe. I trusted them, and that trust became the first step toward losing the most precious part of my life, my independence. At first, everything seemed quite respectable. A neat room, well-kept corridors, polite staff. But very soon I noticed how my right to choose was quietly being taken away. I was no longer the one deciding when to get up in the morning. The daily routine was set in advance: wake-up call, breakfast, a walk, lunch, quiet time. All decisions were made for me: when to go outside, what to wear, when to take my medication. Even meals couldn't be chosen freely, only from what was offered. Any deviation was met with suspicion and reluctance. What I missed might it were my morning rituals: getting up slowly, listening to the radio, drinking coffee by the window while watching the city wake up. Here that was impossible. Everything resembled a hospital, where every patient was just another cog in a big machine. Even a simple request to go outside required prior approval. You had to notify the attendants ahead of time, and walks were permitted only at designated hours. I felt less like a person and more like an object of care. My personal belongings were left behind too. My beloved writing desk, my armchair, my books, all the things that had been a part of me for years stayed in my old home. Here, the furniture was standard, cold, and unfamiliar. The room felt empty, like a hotel room that would never become a real home. Any attempts to create coziness ran into restrictions: no hanging pictures, no bringing too many personal items, no rearranging the furniture. Each morning I woke up with a heavy feeling. My life no longer belonged to me. And the more time passed, the clearer it became that regaining lost freedom was nearly impossible. It wasn't a temporary measure, as I had thought back then, but a new way of existence where there was no place for my habits, dreams, or personal choices. If you are now standing before the choice, to move or not, think 1,000 times. Independence is not just about grand acts. It is about the simple ability to decide how you will live your day. And when you lose that right, life becomes something entirely different. The next loss was the feeling of abandonment. At first, when I had just moved into the nursing home, it seemed that the support of my family would remain a firm foundation. My daughter visited every week. My grandchildren came on weekends, bringing pizzas and sharing news. It felt like I was still part of their lives, even if at a slight distance. These visits were bright spots among the gray days, giving me strength and hope that I was not alone. But time passed, and the rhythm of visits began to slow down. First, they missed one meeting, work obligations, then another. The grandson got sick, and soon the visits became rare and brief. Instead of lively conversations came phone calls, short, hurried, as if squeezed in between more important matters. At first, I found excuses for them. After all, young people have their own lives and worries. But as weeks turned into months, and promises to come for holidays were broken one after another, it became harder to justify. I remember one particularly quiet evening. I sat by the window with the phone in my hand, long hesitating whether to call my son. I wanted to hear his voice, but at the same time, I feared being a burden. I already knew that behind the polite words there hid a slight irritation. Not out of malice, no, but from the eternal lack of time. That evening I realized waiting had become a constant part of my life. I waited for calls, for letters, for visits that might never come. This waiting seeped into my days and nights, filling the emptiness inside. I was not alone in feeling this way. My neighbors in the home also waited for their children and grandchildren. Sometimes we shared stories about upcoming visits, clinging to these sparks of hope. But too often these meetings remained only dreams. One by one, my neighbors accepted the silent reality. Their loved ones' lives continued without them, no matter how painful it was to admit. It is important to understand, moving into a nursing home is not just a change of residence. It is a separation from the familiar world, and the bridges that connect you to it are not always strong enough to hold. Even the most loving relatives cannot replace the fullness of interaction that once was. They mean well, but life dictates its own terms: work, responsibilities, constant haste. And gradually the elderly become distant figures, dear but increasingly invisible. Before making such a decision, you must honestly ask yourself, are you ready to sometimes feel forgotten? This feeling comes quietly, without reproach, but it stays for a long time. And coping with it is much harder than one might imagine at the start of the journey. In the nursing home, I lost not only my freedom and connection, but also my sense of purpose. Before, every day had its small tasks. I would get up early, water the flowers on the windowsill, walk to the store for fresh bread, read newspapers, cook my own lunch. These simple routines seemed insignificant, but they were what filled my days with meaning. I felt needed, alive, part of life, even if that life was quiet and unhurried. When I moved, I found that all the daily concerns were taken over by others. Meals were delivered on schedule, nurses distributed medication, cleaning staff kept the rooms tidy. There was nothing left for me to do but wake up and wait for the next meal or the next walk. At first, it seemed convenient. I could rest, sleep in, and not rush anywhere. But very quickly, I felt the days begin to merge into a single, faceless stream. Without my usual routines, I felt my internal engine stall. I had never before questioned why I got up each morning. Now, every day, I had to search for a reason. I watched my neighbors, once full of energy, lose interest in life. They spent more and more time lying in bed or staring blankly at the television. I especially remember George, my neighbor down the hall. He had been a carpenter, always busy with his hands. In the first weeks, he still tried to craft small wooden items, but then they banned bringing materials for safety reasons. And George began to fade. First, he stopped going outside. Then he spent most of his days dozing. It didn't happen suddenly, but slowly, almost imperceptibly. But if you look closely, you could see when a person is deprived of the chance to engage in what they love, they lose part of themselves. Without purpose, days become empty and the soul grows heavy. The body too starts to fail. Without movement, without stimulation, it quickly loses its strength. In a nursing home, time doesn't heal. It erases you unless you fight back. So if you are considering moving, be sure to ask yourself, what gives you a sense of being needed? Will you be able to preserve it in a place where everything is organized for you? It might be wise to think ahead about activities you can continue even in such conditions, because without work, without purpose, even the warmest and most attentive care cannot save you from the inner emptiness that comes when life loses its colors and no longer brings joy. The most frightening thing I noticed over time was how quickly my health began to deteriorate. At home, despite my age, I remained active. I cooked my own meals, cleaned, went shopping, sometimes worked in the garden. These everyday tasks seemed trivial, but they kept my muscles toned and my mind sharp. I never realized how much strength went into ordinary life and how it helped me maintain mobility and clarity. In the nursing home, everything looked different. The care seemed convenient. There was no need to worry about anything. Everything was brought to you. Everything was done for you. Help was available at the push of a button, and at first glance it seemed like a great advantage. But gradually I began to feel my body giving up. Less movement, less independence, and suddenly my steps became unsteady. My hands grew weaker, and my breathing quickened after just a few paces. I saw it happening both to myself and to my neighbors. Those who had walked briskly through the corridors upon arrival were soon using walkers or confined to wheelchairs. At first, it seemed like the natural course of aging. But when you see it happening to everyone without exception, and so rapidly, you begin to realize it's not just about age. The less you do for yourself, the faster your body forgets how to cope and gives in. Even harder to witness was how quickly belief in one's own strength faded. Small defeats, the inability to button a shirt, forgetting the way to the dining hall, accumulated, building a sense of helplessness. And with it came fear, fear of falling, fear of failing. Over time, many became afraid even to take a simple walk in the courtyard. Thus, unnoticed, a person grows used to complete care and loses faith in themselves. Another important point: Returning home becomes almost impossible. My old house stood empty, but I could no longer go back. I didn't have the physical strength, and fear of independent living had taken root. Many of my neighbors sold their apartments to cover the costs of staying here. Others lost their homes because they could no longer maintain them. This is how the last ties to their former life were gradually severed, and the way back was closed. Moving into a nursing home seems like a temporary solution, a chance to rest and regain strength, but most often it becomes the final stop. Before making such a decision, ask yourself, are you ready for the possibility that with the loss of activity, the path to your former life may be closed forever? This decision requires not only reason but great courage.